Hey again, everyone. So we should be in story elements and plot video part 2, starting at the top right corner of our notes sheet. And we are looking here at the plot diagram that we looked at right before that ended. So we're going to jump right into the exposition, which I hope most of us remember. The exposition is just the beginning of the story. And in the exposition, you will see characters, and the characters and setting are introduced. I hate that I have a comma here. I didn't realize it. We shall get rid of that. Now, it helps give meaning to the actions that are going to take place later in the story. And just what that means is you're introduced to the characters. You're generally introduced to why they are doing the things that they are doing. And so that way when the conflict begins, you understand A, why the conflict begins, B, what drives that conflict, why is the conflict moving through the story the way it is. It's because the characters are the way they are, or the setting is the way that it is. But these two things really help move that conflict forward. Now, our new term is going to be a lot on this page, but we're only going to focus on one little thing. So, initiating event. Initiating, think initials, right? What do your initials do? They begin they're the first letter of your name. They begin your name. So the initiating event begins the conflict. So the moment the main conflict of the story begins. Some might also say is triggered. All right, I feel like that was a word a while ago. I don't know if it's still being used, when you trigger something or trigger someone. But the conflict begins. Now, it's important here to note that it's the main conflict. Stories can have multiple conflicts. They will have multiple conflicts. Just like your general day has multiple conflicts. But what's the main conflict, right? What's the main thing that's driving you through the day? So the initiating event. So what will happen here is you'll be looking at this plot diagram. We'll be introduced to our characters, whomever they are, and then something happens. Okay? And whenever that thing happens, it follows all the way through the rest of the story. You'll notice the other conflicts don't follow all the way through the rest of the story, or they don't drive the action of the rest of the story. They'll happen and they'll be very minor or what have you. So when you're looking for that rising action, there's a lot of things that are happening, but what is the main event? What's the main thing that happened? If it doesn't relate back to that main event, it doesn't belong in this rising action. It doesn't belong in this climax. Okay? So looking at a rising action, again, I'm not trying to get you to type too much here. Type right. But this is a series of events that build up towards the climax, right? We know the climax, I hope. And it's just building tension. It's building suspense. You'll see those words, okay? Tension, suspense, so on and so forth. Now, in this rising action, the conflict is developing. It's building, like we said, just another way of saying building. So it starts to develop here. And then obstacles and problems are introduced that stand in the way of the main character reaching their goal. Whatever their main goal is, the rising action is when some things are happening that prevent them from getting there. Now, they'll eventually get there one way or another, and that'll be our climax. But in the rising action, they're working their way towards it. Okay. So then when we move here into climax, right? This is easy but also tricky for other people. It's known as a turning point. It's got a lot of different terms. The main thing I want you to take away is main conflict reaches its peak, most intense. Usually the conflict ends here because it's so intense. If you're in a superhero movie or a horror movie, this is when the killer in the horror movie is introduced, or the heroine of the horror story is introduced to the killer. Or vice versa, the superhero movie, the superheroes are fighting one another. Okay. So the other thing you can say, it's very intense, but usually the main, I want you to make note of the second thing. Usually the main character is changed in some way. And if you ever have a trouble like being like, oh, is this the main character or not? You'll know based off of they usually have changed in some way, shape, or form by the end of the story. And then we move in directly from that climax into a falling action. So these are the direct results of it. Now, the story winds down here because the conflict should be over or about over. So the story winds down and loose ends are tied up. It is the direct, again, I just said it, the direct effects of the climax. It satisfies the reader's desire to know what happens next. And then again, we learn a lot. We learn a lot about, I don't know why I made that blue, the characters and their connection to the theme in this part of the story. And I haven't said this yet, but I want to make sure I say this when it comes to theme. Theme is directly related to the conflict of the story, and in a sense, how the characters react to that conflict is generally related to the theme. So if your characters learn something, or if you see something that they learned, that's generally connected into the theme in some way. So that's what makes this part of the story important. And then, of course, this leads to our resolution, which is just the end. Now, we don't always have a nice, neat, happy ending, but it is the end of the story. Main conflict is definitely done at this point. It should have already been winding down from the start here down to this. And then it ties up any loose ends that may be left in the story. And that's it, everybody. That is our story elements notes. Now, I do want you to answer these 3 questions on your own and then fill in the summary box here, down here at the bottom. I learned what plot is. I learned the 6 main elements of plot. I learned the story elements and plot. I can look at a plot diagram and identify the 6 main parts, something along those lines. I apologize for the length of the second video. I generally don't like to go over 6 minutes, but it happens. So thank you all for watching. If you have any questions, let me know. We are going to move into practices and then reading our first short story either today or later this week. All right, bye everyone.